A Build Hatch developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of Build Hatch. On this week's episode of Build Hatch, I got to sit down in Melbourne and chat with one of Australia's most interesting architects, Chris from Megowan Architectural. I've been a massive fan of Megowan's work for a while, and as you'll hear, Chris and his team are very practical-minded building designers who very much love to get to know their clients in order to custom design their clients' spaces. That's a very important aspect of engaging your architect, and I love Megowan's DNA and mantra, which is very much about collaborating and thinking outside of the square, but most importantly, making a concerted effort to design buildings and projects that can be built. I think you'll enjoy our very practical chat, and I always love hearing from a leading architect's perspective. So let's get into it. Chris from Megowan Architectural, welcome to Build Hatch.
Thanks for having me.
That's all right. Now, like all our guests, before we get to hear the wonderful designs that Megowan Architectural works on, we always like to take it back to the very beginning and hear about our guests and the story behind their work. So if we can take it back to the beginning, whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, so in the kind of West Valley in Los Angeles, if that means anything to your listeners, and studied architecture in Southern California. So I went to a university called University of Southern California. Yeah, I guess in terms of studying architecture, it wasn't necessarily the first thing that I chose, funny enough. Like when I was a young kid, I always wanted to study architecture. But then I found
Why
music.
is that? Were you influenced in a certain way as a kid, or was it the home you were living in?
My dad's a engineer, and he had actually, so he's a mechanical engineer. So I kind of grew up tinkering around the edges on various kind of boats and old cars and things like that. And so there was kind of an element of that in terms of the pragmatism. And then I won't say a lot, but a few of my dad's friends from college were actually architects. And I always thought they were kind of the coolest people to hang around. The best Christmas cards came from the architects, and their houses were always the most interesting when we'd go to maybe holiday parties at their houses. So maybe that kind of caught my imagination as a young kid. I've got the same kind of Lego and woodblock origin story that probably many architects share. My dad, being an engineer, we had Lionel trains and we had HO cars, like slot cars, and so we'd kind of be constantly creating these worlds in our garage. And so maybe there was probably an element of that sparked that joy. But then
A little
I
bit of
found music.
methodical thinking.
Yeah, kind of imagination maybe. And so I was lucky to have parents that kind of, I suppose, supported that kind of world. And then that kind of actually led into music in high school. And I thought I'd be a rock star. And then that moved into kind of recording arts. And so I kind of worked in a few recording studios, and I thought that was going to be the way, and went to USC, not for architecture, went for music industry.
What sort of music were you playing around with?
It was a bit of a fusion, like if you can imagine kind of a folk electropop kind of fusion, maybe like, and then a little bit of avant-garde, just kind of sonic noise, like Radiohead was a big influence at the time, probably like half the people of my generation. But yeah, like I think it was that process of kind of taking multiple ideas and bringing them together and curating them into a song that I really enjoyed. So I liked songwriting, and then also kind of collaborating with my friends in school and trying to, take divergent ideas and bring them together into a cohesive whole. So I think there was definitely a thought process there that paralleled architecture. But unfortunately, to my dismay at USC, and no hard feelings towards the music industry program there, but it was very technical in terms of the education. So it was very much like sit at a control board, turn this knob, fade to this track. And it was not very creative, at least at the time. And so it was purely about kind of studying the music business. Here's how contracts are written, here's how the industry is currently structured. And it was at a time where the industry is in complete flux anyway. So we were kind of learning about an industry in a way that was not going to be relevant in 5 years. So my personal take on it was let's jump ship. I went and had some friends in the architecture program and saw what they were doing, and it was the antithesis. It was making models and lots of drawing and exploration and lots of kind of computer software, and then it was a studio environment. So we were in this dedicated studio space, and you'd sit around with your peers, and you'd often learn more from your peers than you did from your teachers. Not, and we had pretty amazing teachers, but that kind of collaborative environment was pretty inspiring. So I think that's kind of what I was looking for. Probably out of the music industry, that would have been awesome if we'd had that. Like, imagine if we had like a studio where you're there with 12 other musicians and you're just, bouncing ideas off each other and learning. That's what architecture was. And that first year of architecture was amazing. It was also incredibly challenging, but it was a vibrant period of creativity. And I think I came into it pretty uninitiated. Maybe that kind of naivety. And that actually helps in a way, instead of coming into it with a preconceived notion of what architecture was, being a blank canvas where my teachers could kind of write all over me. It was a lot of fun.
Is architecture a long degree over in the States, like 6 years, like it is here in Oz?
Yeah, it's a 5-year degree, but as it happens, it has to be in sequence. So it's unlike other degrees where you can kind of mix and match. You have to take 10 studios in succession. And so what that meant was I basically burnt a year of tuition at USC, much to my student debt and my parents' dismay. And so, luckily, a lot of the credits from the first year did transfer over. But yeah, I was in school for 6 years. It was a lot of fun. It was
I bet.
a great time. And I kind of transitioned in that period. Like, the beginning was all kind of conceptual, and, you're just exploring these pretty airy-fairy ideas, really. Like, there was a lot of technical, I guess, education in terms of, drafting and the computer programs. But if you saw maybe any of our studio projects in the first 3 years as a builder, you'd be horrified. There was a point of departure around my third year of architecture school, and then my fourth year of uni. And I kind of wanted to transfer more into that kind of realistic, like, how do I take these ideas and translate them into something that's actually buildable? What does it mean to take something from the screen or the page and bring it to a site? So there was a few things that I undertook at that stage. Like, I went out and worked. So one of the benefits of having that first year where it kind of freed up some of my, call them general education credits, was that I actually didn't have a full course load the last 2 years of my university, which meant I worked part-time through that whole period for one of my teachers, actually. And I learned an immense amount there. And it was completely different to school, as every architect will tell you, like the kind of conceptual knowledge versus the kind of practical knowledge. You got to go seek out the practical knowledge. So that working experience kind of was really fortunate, I suppose, because while I was in school, then I was actually getting that kind of reality that I was then able to infuse back into my education and kind of mind my professors, instead of, talking about some very loose concept, talking to them about, like, how can we, make
theory,
this wall work, and what's a better way to achieve, this detail. And it was brought to life too, because I actually purchased land, or actually a house, a duplex is what we call it in America, but a duoloc is probably what you might know it as, with a friend, and right on the side of the university, and about a block off the university, and that was my first development. So at 22, we were the kind of the poster children of the GFC in a way, because they, with no income and no assets, they gave us a loan that we probably shouldn't have gotten. But to our credit, we'd done our numbers and we'd figured it out, and we were not one of the ones who the banks came for. We paid our mortgage, and we built an extension off the back. So we built a 4-bedroom, 2 living room extension out the back, and that was my first architectural project. And that was while I was still in school, and that was pretty cool, really. It was super exciting to see something that you've designed get built, and then also all the challenges of engaging a builder, and all the cliches, the delays, the interest cost, the kind of stress. I remember at one point in the build, it was so stressful because it was just going over time, and at that time we didn't have heaps of money. I actually was driving down Venice Boulevard, and I was on the phone with my contractor builder, and he kind of gave me a timeline that meant another kind of 3 months, which was going to be, the sum of money that was unfathomable to me. And I literally threw my head down into my hands while driving, and in that moment, I rear-ended a car in front of me. I wasn't going very fast, but that was kind of like a good little anecdote, I suppose, of what it's like to build your first extension. There's a few metaphors in there, I think.
I bet, and a few signs, I think, too.
Yeah, Yeah. You would have thought that would have been, I guess, the thing that would have probably put me off, but it's it's a bit of an addiction, isn't it? Like you come back
It
for
is.
more. I'm sure you
Yeah,
as a
that's
builder
right.
know there's a level of insanity to what we do.
Yeah, resilience.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. uh,
Now, when you were at uni, were you leaning towards a certain industry of architecture, like a certain aspect, whether it was residential or commercial, or was it just sort of all of the above and not specific at the time?
I don't think I really knew exactly what type of architecture I wanted to do then, and I don't know if I even know now. In a way, like I'm open to trying out new things. But I think what I did know was that I wanted to work for myself in the kind of medium term. And I, again, probably credit to my dad. He's a small business owner, so I grew up around that. And I guess all of the highs and lows of that, the wins and losses of owning a small business, I was well acquainted with. And again, maybe it's a form of insanity because it wasn't always easy for my dad, but that just seemed like the way that I wanted to kind of go about it as well. In the creative industry, you gain more control over outcomes by attempting to own the process. Not that anyone can really own a process as complex as building a building. So that kind of, I guess, was infused in my education. And at that age, I knew, like the idea of taking the initiative and purchasing a block of land and extending it and renting it out to students. We did it for, nearly a decade, a friend and I. There's a degree of entrepreneurship there, I suppose, or, taking initiative. And while we didn't really get rich off that project, and you don't really, turns out, ever get rich off any project, it kind of gave me a little bit of the startup capital to then go on and do other things. So when I sold that, I took that into another development in Melbourne, and it also kind of gave a little bit of that buffer that you need just to take on your first staff. You can't just have $0 in your bank account and hire someone. You got to have a bit of a float, as anyone who runs a business knows. And so it's kind of all those like little steps along the way that allowed that startup and I guess, maybe the career that I've had to date. Back to your question, bit of a long-winded response, sorry. I was always interested in residential architecture. I did my thesis on essentially what's townhouses, but at the time it was something called small lot subdivisions in Los Angeles, which is something that in Australia seems pretty obvious. Like you can have zero lot line conditions between houses, but at the time I was in school, there was basically none of that in Los Angeles. And so they just introduced a new ordinance which allowed effectively townhouse development. And so I spent a semester just studying what the impacts on kind of urban development within the kind of downtown or CBD of Los Angeles, like what the impacts of this ordinance would be. And so I think that probably showed an early interest in something that was a little bit marrying the conceptual with the pragmatic, or even the kind of policy, like what impacts does policy have on built form, which is maybe a little bit of a nerdy interest, but it really, as you would know, drives so much of what we do.
It does, and it's definitely something that gets, I guess, overlooked. It's easy for people to take a snapshot and see a project, and it looks nice, and there's definitely that aspect. But you are certainly right. To go back 4 or 5 steps, it does develop out of policy, like you said.
Yeah, they set the framework, whoever they is, councils or the state, it really controls what that outcome is going to be, and you can kind of reverse engineer it. And then part of the fun of being an architect is trying to find the opportunities within that policy. And so that's
And
kind of what
challenges as well.
the challenges and overcoming them, and kind of marrying sometimes competing policies, and that particular thesis, I suppose, also looked at how townhouse developments or these small lot subdivisions would start to kind of ripple out next to each other, and how ideas that weren't really present in the planning policy of Los Angeles, like amenity impacts, and how you might have kind of like shared spaces where you have to kind of mirror a courtyard so that you get a greater sense of outdoor space out of a shared space. Seems kind of obvious in terms of the way that we deal in Victoria, but that was not something, at least at the time, that was prevalent or even present in the LA planning schemes. So, that was kind of interesting as a start. And then it's kind of funny that I've actually ended up, maybe full circle, we do a fair bit of townhouses within our practice. And, whether or not that was that kind of seed planted back then, or something that's just been happenstance, but there's a bit of serendipity there.
What brought you from the States over down under to Melbourne?
I'd love to say it was some kind of like mastermind where I just, researched all the great cities of the world and found Melbourne and, said, oh, this is where I'm going to start my business and raise my family. But it was much more accidental than that. Like, we were working pretty hard. My then girlfriend and I, kind of were in our early mid-20s and long hours, and LA is kind of a tough town when you're young. I guess you're not. I was earning $38,000 a year, which doesn't get you very far in Los Angeles. And so we thought, why don't we just take a break before life gets serious and go on a working holiday? So we were just backpackers on Gray Street in St. Kilda, and it was supposed to be a year out. I was happy to tend bar. As it happens, I lucked out and ended up working for a very small architectural practice in St. Kilda and had a really great boss who was he didn't make me work 80 hours a week, and we got to work on beautiful kind of rural and beach houses and kind of sit down with the detail. And because it was so small, it was quite an intimate work setting. And so when the first year came up, he's like, well, Chris, do you want to stick around? And kind of hadn't even really been seeking it. But then it was like, well, what are we going to do back in LA? Like, why don't we stay another year turned to 3. And then I think 14 years later, you've got 2 Australian children and a couple businesses and a wife.
Here we are.
And a mortgage.
Now, I love your mantra with Megowan Architectural, and key phrases that go along with your brand are things like sophisticated, sensible, and adventurous architecture, or passion meets patience. So I really love how you're able to articulate these words with your designs and capture the sort of essence, if you like. How does that come about with your practice? Like, what sort of turns your practice on and takes on a particular brief? And like, what would you say your style is to develop those projects?
I mean, I think there's a degree of grit, as you touched on. To get anything built is such a long process that there's kind of no such thing as a simple build. And then there's an element of pragmatism that has to drive it. I guess I would love to sit here and say we're driven by just a pure artistic curiosity or, some poetic driver. But the reality is we have to kind of marry, I guess, our artistic ambitions to the real world. While maybe not a glamorous pitch for my practice, I think that is something that we do well. We balance a lot of the varying competing interests of building design and architecture. And that's how we get outcomes. I mean, we've been fortunate to be able to get a lot of our jobs to site and a lot of our jobs built. And, for someone my age, I'm 39, we've got a relatively established portfolio for a career that's traditionally left for the olds. They say you only get better with age in architecture. And I think the reason why we've got that kind of portfolio of built work is because we're not just coming at it with a pure artistic flair, and that's there, like no question. Like we really want to make beautiful projects as best we can, and that's where that sophistication piece comes in, and maybe the adventurous piece, something that pushes the envelope. But to push the envelope, you've got to kind of understand the system within which that building is operating, and that's budgets, and that's regulatory environments, that's knowing how to communicate with builders and trades and understanding how these things come together. And while I don't think we're unique in that regard, there's plenty of amazing architects in Melbourne and Australia. It's something that we do well alongside many of our peers. That's our process. I've got an amazing team behind me. I mean, that is paramount. A lot of them have been with me one of them's been with me for 9 years, and a lot of them have been with me they're coming up on their long service leave at 7 years. So 2 of them next February get to go off and explore the world for a few months. And so that's really important. Like there's a lot of almost ESP that goes on in the office, like where they hear my voice in the back of their head when they're designing something complicated, and it kind of, grounds it a little bit. That's how so far we've gotten the outcomes.
What's your view at the moment of the industry? I mean, we're recording this in 2022. What's your sort of view on the current climate, and how do you apply your edge, if you like, to be able to facilitate that and make it happen?
It's harder now than ever. I mean, as you would know as a builder and anyone in the industry, if they're kind of tracking the moment we're in right now, whenever you're listening to this episode, we've just seen astronomical rises in construction pricing. And I don't know who's winning here. I haven't met anybody who's winning, basically. It seems, you'd think if prices have gone up, the newspapers say 20%. My experience is more like 30%. If the prices are going up that much, someone's winning, but the builders I know are struggling. The architects I know are having projects put on hold. The trades, they're getting chewed up, so I don't know if there's someone pulling the levers in the background getting rich, but I haven't met them. And yet we've seen these astronomical price increases, which are not of a kind that most people, our clients included, can absorb. If we started a project, say 12 to 18 months ago, the reality is 30% rise from that period, that's a planning process. So most of our projects that are coming out of planning, we're having to have very difficult conversations and very kind of blunt conversations. And what that means is either the budget has to increase 30%, which even if you're wealthy, that's not easy. If you're building something that's $1 million house and then you now have to find 1.3 for the exact same scope, it's not a easy pill to swallow. Or you got to shrink scope. And so we're doing a mixture of both, where a lot of nice to haves are kind of falling off. Maybe there's a slight positive silver lining there, that it makes us kind of take a look at the way we live and kind of evaluate what truly is necessary, but that might also just be a bit of spin. Like they're not fun conversations, and we're having them up front. We're not trying to get to the end of the tendering process and then kind of get blown out of the water. We're basically making all our clients engage with a builder right at town planning, permit issue, and getting that cost projection up front. And so in a way, at least we have a room to pivot, but it doesn't make it any easier. Like, no one likes to see a family have to kind of grapple with whether their kids are going to have to share a room, or like they've got this big dream that they come to us with, which is amazing and one of the inspiring parts of our job. But then kind of slowly having to kind of whittle away at that dream, and sometimes it takes being quite firm. You tell a client what it's going to cost, and I think because it's kind of tomorrow money, and that the hard figures aren't in front of them, there's a denial maybe. And we have to kind of be very firm with where it's going to sit as best we can on something that doesn't even exist yet, right? So we haven't even finished designing it, and we're having to kind of project, which is very difficult. We're having to get builders in to help us project what the cost is, and they're doing their best, and they're trying, they're not doing anything dishonest. They're just trying to kind of guess. And then you've got scope creep and all these things that are normal, but then in an environment which is hugely inflationary, right? Like, I mean, we're worried about kind of 6-7% of inflation across the economy, but in our industry we've experienced, I think, 30%. And if you have a project that relies on steel, probably even more. So it's hard.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and that's a good lead into, because it's one of the things that I'm having these conversations with people all the time about. The traditional tender model is a little bit on ice. So I think it may creep back in a little bit as the industry continues to get tighter and tighter. And it sounds like that's what your practice is doing well, is trying to get the preferred builders in nice and early and get their input, albeit if it's as best they can do. And it is a bit of a guess, as you say, it's putting another head into the mix.
Yeah, and a head that's even more at the coalface than we are, right? I mean, we've got enough projects on to get a pretty clear idea of what's happening on the ground, but at the same time, the builders are the direct line to the trades, and the trades are the direct line to the resources, right? That are kind of increasing, and they're getting the price rise notices and saying, oh, plaster's going up by 7% on June 30 or whatever it is. And so at least the builders coming in are able to kind of price in those increases as best they can. And so, yeah, you're right. We're doing a lot of negotiated tenders. It's our preferred way. Not every client's open to that. And so it is on a client by client basis, but our preference is to work with builders that we trust and get them in and get them to kind of collaborate with us on the pricing. The pricing's, it's in a way the most challenging part about what we do. And so if we get them in early, at least we can kind of get to a realistic point, and then the clients get a level of transparency into the process as well. As much as can be given, really, because you're breaking it down into line items, and you're able to have a chat and go, look, there's a $130,000 joinery package option for your house. There's a $60,000 joinery package option, you're probably not going to be very happy, having hired us with $60,000 budget. And then there's a $250,000 joinery and stone package. And these are what these things look like. You can even choose different joiners and you're going to get a different outcome, even with the same scope of drawings. And we're able to kind of flush that out. And then having that level of kind of discussion and control for the client, I think helps, at least they kind of feel involved as opposed to this big kind of sticker shock at the end. And that's another point that's much better about a negotiated tender versus a competitive tender. I think we all know that builders need to make money. And if you look at the line items, like the builders aren't making, buckets, they're taking a massive risk. They're bringing an incredible amount of experience, and then they're being very transparent with what they're charging. I guess maybe another way to put it, the fear that often is brought up by clients is that if I don't have a competitive price, how do I know I'm not overpaying? And I think, you can get into the grain of the pricing so much now in terms of that transparency in those line items that we can get a high level of confidence that you're not overpaying. You almost tender at the level of a trade where you're getting multiple quotes on the trades. Maybe you're getting 3 steel quotes, for example. And so that's how you can kind of build that confidence. But then you're working towards, the same goal with another kind of consultant on the team being the builder. And with everyone kind of having that deeper understanding of the process, you do get a better outcome.
Yeah, certainly. And the builders listening to this who want to be proactive and reach out to architects to take that approach, do you see that as like an investment of their time where they just say, look, I'm prepared to make this investment of my time to demonstrate my commitment to you, to build that trust? Or is it a case of builders wanting to charge for that time? Like, what's sort of a balanced approach to that?
The way that we deal with it, so I sit down with my clients after town planning, and it's a conversation that comes up before, but I kind of bring it to a head after town planning, or basically right before we're about to engage a structural engineer. So if there isn't town planning on a house, at the point where we're done with the schematic design, we sit down and we put forward the options, right? Here are your kind of divergent pathways. We can get a builder in now. We recommend this, or we can kind of march along and kind of go to a competitive tender. You're going to be at a massive risk of sticker shock. I'll be in the background going, I don't know if you need that, $60,000 oven, but you might not listen to me, and so having the builder involved helps you manage that budget earlier on. There's a third pathway, which is getting the QS at the scale of most of what we do being, probably under $3 million. The QSs I don't find to be accurate enough to kind of control that dialogue, whereas the builders actually are. So again, the negotiated tenders, in my opinion, a better outcome. What we say to them is, look, if you're going to enter this negotiated contract, you're doing it in good faith. Like no one wants their time to be wasted. And as a kind of, I guess, earnest money, we highly suggest that if you do this, the thing that you should do is, if you don't, for whatever reason, go ahead with the builder. Like the last minute you wig out and just think, I don't want to die wondering if I've got the best price. You should pay a nominal amount. Like we generally say about $3,000, just as a kind of recognition of the time that's gone in. Yeah, it depends on the size of the project. We chat about it with the builder, what they're comfortable with, but it's essentially there as a commitment by the client to not waste the builder's time and just kind of mind their IP.
The way that I look at it is it's a marketing exercise, right? So if I'm a builder and I want to be a part of the Megowan Architectural brand, I say to builders all the time, you need to do the hard yards. You might spend 2 full-time weeks. Now, I mean, when I say 2 weeks, that might be spread out across a month for, a typical $1 million project. There's a month's worth of work, 2 weeks full-time in the office, 10-hour days. That's what it takes. Now, if you look at that from a marketing exercise, and I sit down and I do that exercise with Chris and his team from Megowan, even if that job doesn't come to fruition, most people, 9 times out of 10, will recognize that commitment, that the investment of your time that you put in, you'll get another opportunity, and you're highly likely to get the next one, because that architect, are likely to say, well, look, this guy did the hard yards on that other job. I know the builder's got the money to do this one. Let's get him involved with this one. And your probability of getting that job increased substantially.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely is a marketing thing, but it's a tough one too, because we like doing it with builders we've already had a run on the board with, because we're also trying to represent our our clients and build trust between all relationships, right? Because I mean, as you know, trust is, maybe the most important commodity in a build, right? Like it's without it, if you don't trust between your trades and, the builder, the architect, the client, it makes it quite challenging. But I guess to your point, getting in there and interfacing with the architect early on builds that trust, showing that, that the pricing is fair. We're not trying to screw all the trades down or the builder's margin down. In fact, often I'm pushing for supervision. One of the things that I always see whenever I see a cheap tender, for example, the first thing that's cut is supervision, and then you show up to a site and there's, one builder running around in 20 jobs trying to, just make phone calls in the car to try to keep it going. And I don't know, maybe that works in a volume build, but I don't think it works for an architectural build. There's just so much detail, so much care to get across. And, you need that supervision line item. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they're a well-paid bunch, and they should be a well-paid bunch because it's a huge skill set. But then that, take that into a year's salary, even if you split a supervisor across 2 jobs or 3 jobs, it's still a hefty 5-figure sum. At least having that conversation with the clients. Like when we do negotiate a tender, for example, I say, look, this is not the way that you're going to get your cheapest price. It's the way that you're going to get the kind of best value, right? And so we've even tested this. So there's been two negotiated tenders which have fallen over that I can think of. The client freaks out, wants a tender. We go out, and the negotiated tenders, they were within 30 grand. I'll say like a $1.5 million contract. They were within 30 grand of the cheapest price. Lo and behold, when you went line item by line item, the big difference was supervision. And so we were able to have that kind of chat and go, look, if you want to roll the dice and hope that, every trade is just going to show up unguided and this thing's going to click together, you can go for it. But I've never seen it happen. And so having those discussions along the way in that negotiated process, it builds rapport, like then all of a sudden the clients aren't questioning why the prelims are what they are or why the supervision is what it is, because they understand the value in it as opposed to just the sticker shock at the end. It's harder in a competitive tender to kind of distill all that information in the, 1 week where they see all the prices come back at them and freak out. So yeah, I guess further insight into why we like it and why I think it's a fruitful marketing exercise for builders. I'm happy for our clients to pay for that service. I think it's a valuable service. But on top of that, I think you've got a better chance of landing the job, actually, as opposed to just casting out a figure, like 1 against 4, and hoping for the best. How much time do builders spend tendering, and not getting a job?
Yeah, well, it's the going rate at the moment is around 30 to 37%. So, and I say it all the time, if you're winning 3 jobs out of 10 that you're quoting, well, that's the going rate. You're sort of on track and on par, and it's easier to say that because as a builder, you're paying a contract administrator or a team of people to estimate and win those jobs. But the step that you have to take from being that builder who's doing 2 or 3 jobs, they're managing it and pricing the jobs to themselves, as to stepping up and taking that next step as a business where you're employing a contract administrator or an estimator and their job is to win the tender. And if you're winning 3, he's paying for himself. So it's a different business model. But to your point, as you say, if you want to play with the big guys, that's generally the difference. You need that supervision on site, particularly with your type of projects.
Yeah, I don't see any way around it.
No, that's right.
It does,
definitely.
As any builder knows, it doesn't just kind of click together. You're constantly having to coordinate and supervise and kind of stage the works effectively. And that doesn't work just by the tiler saying he can show up on a Tuesday. And
Yeah,
someone's
that's right.
there kind of driving it.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, what's on the cards for Megowan Architectural and the rest of your team? What are you looking at in the future?
Well, it's an odd moment in a way, because we've just talked about the challenges facing the industry, and you would have thought, with a 30% price rise, the phone would stop ringing, and I'm very, for lack of a better word, blunt at the kind of, I guess, first conversation with clients, because there's no use trying to, promise that we're going to do a $500,000 extension that I know is going to cost $1 million, or, $1 million house that's going to cost $2 million. And so you would have thought that the kind of outcome of those blunt conversations would put people off. And it does. I mean, absolutely, there are people that show up with unrealistic budget expectations, and they don't call back. But the surprising thing is actually a lot of them are still going ahead. It's surprising, where you can sit around and have that kind of conversation and say, oh, look, yeah, that house is going to be $400,000 more than you think it's going to be. What do you want to do? And the conversation's always along the lines of like, look, we can get rid of this amount of scope to bring you down to your budget, or vice versa. The fun thing about that is we've got a lot of cool projects in the pipeline. We've got a lot of beach houses that I really enjoy. So we've some really cool one down in Rye, one in Oliver's Hill and Frankston South, one in Mount Martha, one in Mornington that's going to be heading to site soon. And so those are always quite fun projects. And we do a fair bit of townhouses, as I mentioned earlier. So developer work, but maybe enlightened developers. So if someone's trying to come to us and build the cheapest, nastiest thing, we'll probably say thanks, but no thanks. For the kind of developers that see value in good design and kind of clever design, where that kind of can yield positive results on site, maybe just smarter spaces. So you're taking compact homes and getting more out of them. And that's where design can really add value. For those developers, we definitely work for them. And that's fun, like in terms of, we're not doing the dog boxes, we're doing kind of townhouses that really operate as homes. They've got kind of double car garages, and they're 2 or 3 stories. They're kind of minimum 6 meters wide, but oftentimes kind of 8 to 10 meters wide. So they're quite high amenity things, even though they're kind of multifamily. I guess I kind of like that in a way. It's solving a middle problem, I suppose. We do a fair bit of high end work, no question. But then the townhouses kind of serve that somewhat forgotten market. You've got the kind of investor grade little tiny apartments, and you've got the big kind of mansions and stuff that architects do. And then the townhouses, they fill that gap, I suppose, which is pretty underrepresented. And that's been something that's actually brought us a fair amount of success as well, kind of being early to that piece. And it seems like the market has kind of moved more towards that type of product. But we were doing the kind of townhouses back when 45 square meter one beddies were getting built.
Look, I have a theory on the best market at the moment, and it's exactly where you're heading, funnily enough, because although there's, call it a temporary or sudden price decrease in property prices going on at the moment, the safest construction market at the moment is the market where people still value their spaces. So whether it's they still want their beach house, or they want to still build down the coast and be able to commute to their place of work, that's a safe market, because people still value their spaces, and they may not be prepared to sacrifice on certain things. And then you have the other market, the townhouse market, the tier 1, tier 2, because the people that are still living, let's pick Melbourne as an example, they still want to live in their suburb, just downsize, and they don't want to sacrifice and move into a shoebox or an apartment. So those two types of industries within the construction space at the moment, they're a sure thing, I think, for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't want to be prognosticating too much, because we may be sitting here in 6 months just all in tears, and as the whole industry collapses. I don't know. But I mean, just this morning, like we launched 8 townhouses in Glen Iris for pre-sales about a week ago. And if you were to look at the tea leaves, now is just about one of the worst times. You had, gaggles of interest rate increases, like what are we at, like
sure.
2.5% up higher. And if you read the newspapers, it's doom and gloom, projecting 20-30% price drops in property value. So pretty much like not a great time to launch a speculative project. And, I've just got a text this morning from our agent that 2 of them are put on hold on the weekend, and I don't know if they'll close, but I think it's to your point, they are done well. Like they're really nice homes. They're 3-bedroom homes that suit a variety of people at various stages in their life by design. And those people still need a place to live. And, in the face of all the doom and gloom and the massive headwinds that the industry faces, people are still booking in appointments, and they're still, reserving townhouses. And probably now more than ever, you've got to do it well.
Definitely. And that's what it comes down to. And I think people are realizing that. And every architect I talk to is busy as well, because people are now more than ever seeing value in spaces. And as you know, when you come to an architect, we're not talking about drafting up someone's home and typical layouts and things like this. This is about utilizing space, functionality, all the above, which is what they're paying you for. That's the difference.
Yeah, creating delight is something that they teach us in school. That's one of the kind of main pillars of architecture is creating spaces that delight. So far, there's still a pretty big market for spaces that delight.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of that, if people listening to this want to reach out to you, Chris, and your firm and come meet your team from your practice, what's the best way to go about it?
Oh, I guess pick up the phone. You can Google us, Megowan. Go to www.m-a.com.au and happy to chat.
No, look, it's been wonderful sitting here in Melbourne, getting to have a chat, Chris, and I really appreciate you coming on to Build Hatch. It's an inspiring story, and I really look forward to seeing yourself and Megowan Architectural in the amazing projects that are coming to light in future. So well done to you, and thanks again for coming on to Build Hatch.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for reaching out. It's been fun.
Well, that was another Build Hatch episode with Chris from Megowan Architectural. As usual, if you know a hard worker having a go in the construction space or a building related business, person or product where you love what they are doing or selling, then please do get into contact with us and we'll be more than happy to tell their story and get behind their goods or services on the Build Hatch marketplace. Our team are busy rolling out independent sellers on buildhatch.com as we speak, so stay tuned for more and more products and services as they onboarded. As usual, please check out our Instagram page and other socials where you'll be able to learn more about our guests and some of the features of the work that we talk about. Have a great week, and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Build Hatch.
You have experienced a Build Hatch developed production.